January 29, 1991. The location is the moonless desert just south of the Kuwaiti border, near the coastal road leading toward the Saudi town of Khafji. Night has fully settled, and the darkness is absolute. There is no ambient light, no horizon glow, no visual reference beyond sand and sky. To the naked eye, the desert appears empty. But through first-generation night vision optics, the battlefield is very much alive. Iraqi armored columns from the 3rd and 5th Mechanized Divisions are advancing south, engines rumbling, tracks grinding against hard-packed sand. For the Iraqi tank crews, this moment represents a long-awaited reversal. After weeks of relentless coalition airstrikes, tonight is meant to prove that ground combat will be different. Heavy armor, mass, and experience will decide the fight. Inside Soviet-built T-55 and T-62 tanks, commanders review familiar expectations. If the Americans contest the advance, they will do so with main battle tanks. M60S or the feared M1 Abrams. Big guns, thick armor, a symmetrical fight governed by known rules. Iraqi gunners have prepared firing solutions for long-range tank engagements. Ammunition racks are loaded with armor-piercing rounds designed to defeat heavy steel. The doctrine is straightforward: detect, engage, destroy. This is how armored warfare is supposed to work. But as the lead elements cross into Saudi territory, something feels wrong. There are no opposing engine noises, no thermal signatures consistent with turbine-powered tanks, no defensive artillery fire. The radio nets remain quiet except for routine movement reports. Confidence begins to creep in. Perhaps the Marines along the border are only a thin screen. Perhaps they have withdrawn under air pressure. Then, without warning, the night explodes. A bright streak cuts across the darkness. A forward tank is hit and instantly disabled. Not damaged, but violently removed from the fight. Seconds later, another vehicle burns. Panic ripples through the formation. Gunners traverse their turrets, searching for targets that refuse to appear. There are no visible tanks, no large heat sources, only fleeting flashes of movement and the sharp, rhythmic sound of automatic cannon fire echoing from the darkness. Vehicles are being hit from the flanks and rear, from distances and angles that do not make sense. Reports flood the command net. Enemy fire, unknown origin. Fast-moving contacts, missiles inbound, but the picture will not resolve. What is attacking them is smaller than expected, faster than expected, and operating beyond the limits of Iraqi night fighting capability. Within minutes, carefully organized armored columns begin to lose cohesion. Units slow, halt, or bunch together, unsure where to direct their overwhelming firepower. What Iraqi commanders do not yet understand is that they are no longer fighting a traditional armored battle. They have encountered a form of warfare shaped by Cold War evolution, one that prioritizes sensors, mobility, decentralized command, and night dominance over sheer armor thickness. The realization will come too late. As the Iraqi advance presses forward into uncertainty, the hunters in the darkness are already repositioning, preparing to strike again. The confusion intensifies as the Iraqi armored column continues south, propelled more by momentum than understanding. Orders from higher headquarters urge the advance to continue. Intelligence assessments, built on Soviet doctrine, insist that whatever resistance is being encountered must be light and temporary. A screening force, a reconnaissance element delaying the inevitable. The logic is seductive. No lightly armored unit should be capable of stopping a mechanized division in open desert at night. Iraqi commanders convince themselves that what they are experiencing is harassment, not decisive resistance. On the ground, reality is far harsher. Tank crews report being engaged from multiple directions almost simultaneously. One moment, fire comes from the left flank. Seconds later, from behind. By the time a turret completes its slow hydraulic traverse, the target has vanished. Iraqi gunners struggle with limited night optics that provide narrow fields of view and poor resolution. They search for the large, bright thermal signatures of enemy tanks, because that is what they have been trained to see. Instead, the enemy appears as small, fleeting shapes that blend into the cool desert background and then disappear entirely. The sounds are unsettling. Not the thunderous boom of a tank cannon, but a rapid, mechanical thumping that seems to hammer at the hulls of armored vehicles. External fuel drums ignite, optics shatter, radios fail. Vehicles that are not destroyed outright become combat ineffective within seconds, blind and immobilized. The effect on morale is immediate. Crews button up, sealing themselves inside steel compartments with limited visibility, which only worsens their situational awareness. The battlefield becomes a series of isolated, terrified crews reacting independently rather than a coordinated armored force. Iraqi command posts struggle to interpret the reports. They hear references to automatic cannon fire, anti-tank missiles, and vehicles moving at extraordinary speed. Some officers suspect American infantry with shoulder-fired weapons. Others insist it must be tanks firing from hull-down positions beyond visual range. Neither explanation fully fits. The enemy seems too mobile for infantry and too elusive for heavy armor. The conclusion reached is dangerously wrong. The Americans must be exposing themselves by overextending light units without proper support. This miscalculation shapes the next set of decisions. Rather than consolidating, the Iraqi command orders continued movement toward Khafji. Urban terrain, they believe, will neutralize whatever advantage the Americans possess. Streets and buildings will limit maneuver. Close-range fighting will favor numbers and armor. What they do not realize is that the same qualities now terrorizing them in open desert, speed, coordination, and night vision superiority, will become even more lethal once the environment constrains Iraqi movement instead of American maneuver. As the column pushes forward, burning vehicles illuminate the desert in flickering orange light. Each wreck becomes both a landmark and a warning. The hunters are still unseen, but their presence is undeniable. And they are not finished. January 30th, 1991 arrives with a pale, dust-filtered dawn. For the first time since crossing the border, Iraqi tank crews can see the battlefield clearly. What they see only deepens the unease that began the night before. The desert floor behind them is littered with disabled vehicles. Many burned, others intact but abandoned. Turrets are frozen at odd angles. Optics are shattered. Tracks show frantic reversals and abrupt turns. Most telling of all are the marks in the sand. Instead of the deep, parallel grooves left by heavy tracked armor, the ground is crisscrossed with thin, irregular tire tracks. This discovery spreads quickly through Iraqi command channels. They are not fighting tanks. They are fighting wheeled vehicles. According to conventional doctrine, this should be good news. Wheeled reconnaissance vehicles are fragile. They lack armor protection and heavy guns. In every armored manual studied by Iraqi officers, such vehicles are described as vulnerable support elements, useful for screening or patrol but incapable of stopping tanks in decisive combat. And yet, the evidence around them contradicts everything they were taught. Dozens of main battle tanks have been rendered useless by an enemy that should not be able to survive a direct hit from a high-explosive round. As daylight advances, the engagement resumes. The Americans do not retreat with the sunrise, as Iraqi commanders expect. Instead, the attacks become more deliberate. Fast-moving vehicles appear briefly on the horizon, fire, and withdraw before return fire can be brought to bear. The pattern repeats itself again and again. Each contact strips away another piece of Iraqi combat power. An immobilized tank here, a destroyed infantry fighting vehicle there, a command vehicle knocked out, severing communication with subordinate units. At Iraqi headquarters, the situation becomes increasingly difficult to control. Reports conflict. Some units claim they are being encircled. Others insist the Americans are inside their formations, darting between vehicles too quickly to engage. Requests for artillery support go unanswered because forward observers cannot provide accurate target coordinates. Iraqi air support is effectively non-existent, neutralized by coalition air superiority. The armored force that was meant to provoke a decisive ground battle finds itself blind, deaf, and isolated. The psychological impact is as damaging as the physical losses. Tank crews begin to hesitate. Drivers slow their advance or stop entirely, fearing ambush. Commanders order vehicles to cluster together for mutual protection, which only makes them more visible and easier to target. The initiative, once assumed to belong to the attacking force, slips away completely. By mid-morning, Iraqi units reach the outskirts of Khafji. The city offers the promise of cover and fixed positions. But it also marks a dangerous transition. What began as a confusing night engagement in open desert is about to evolve into something far more complex. The Americans are not merely delaying the advance. They are shaping the battlefield, channeling Iraqi armor toward an environment where its strengths matter less and its weaknesses will be brutally exposed. By the afternoon of January 30th, Iraqi armored elements are inside Khafji. From the outside, it appears to be a success. Iraqi flags are raised. State media broadcasts images of occupation. Baghdad declares that Iraqi forces have seized Saudi territory and forced the coalition into retreat. For political leadership, the narrative is irresistible. But for the men inside the city, the reality bears little resemblance to victory. Iraqi tanks are positioned along major intersections and narrow streets, their guns oriented down long avenues in anticipation of a counterattack by heavy American armor. Infantry squads establish rooftop positions with rocket-propelled grenades. Defensive perimeters are drawn. On paper, the setup makes sense. Urban terrain should negate long-range optics. Speed should be irrelevant. Armor should dominate confined spaces. Iraqi commanders believe they have finally forced the Americans into a predictable fight. What they do not realize is that the battle has already expanded beyond the ground. As night falls again, the temperature drops and the city sinks into darkness. Iraqi units wait, engines idling, crews tense inside cramped hulls. The expected sound of advancing tank columns never arrives. Instead, a low, persistent hum becomes audible overhead, barely perceptible at first. High above the city, orbiting beyond the reach of Iraqi air defenses, American airborne sensors are already watching. Thermal optics transform rooftops, streets, and alleyways into a glowing map of heat and movement. On the ground, U.S. Marine reconnaissance teams are already in position. Small, lightly equipped, and nearly invisible, they occupy rooftops and abandoned buildings inside the city. They are not there to fight Iraqi tanks directly. They are there to observe, identify, and transmit. Every parked vehicle, every troop concentration, every attempted repositioning is quietly reported. Coordinates flow upward and outward through secure networks linking ground scouts, light armored units, artillery, and aircraft into a single responsive system. The strikes begin with clinical precision. Iraqi units that believe themselves hidden are suddenly hit without warning. Explosions erupt with no visible source. Vehicles are destroyed one at a time, not in chaotic barrages, but in methodical sequence. Crews realize that walls, buildings, and alleyways provide no protection against an enemy that can see heat through concrete and darkness through dust. Panic spreads. Orders conflict. Some commanders attempt to reposition. Others order units to remain static. Communications degrade as radios are jammed or destroyed. The city, once viewed as a shield, becomes a trap. Outside Khafji, American light armored vehicles begin to move again. Refueled, rearmed, and coordinated, they turn toward the city they deliberately allowed the Iraqis to occupy. The hunt is about to enter its most decisive phase. Night returns over Khafji on January 31st, and with it comes the most devastating phase of the engagement. Iraqi units inside the city are now exhausted, disoriented, and increasingly isolated. Fuel is running low. Ammunition has been expended unevenly. Tank crews have spent nearly 48 hours sealed inside overheated hulls, listening for threats they cannot see. What confidence remained after the occupation announcement has eroded into dread. They know something is moving around them, but they cannot determine where the next blow will fall. Above the city, American air power quietly assumes dominance. AC-130 gunships orbit at altitude, their sensors scanning every street and rooftop. From this height, Iraqi defensive positions appear not as fortified strongpoints but as glowing outlines of heat. Tanks parked under overpasses, infantry clustered inside buildings, command posts operating from supposedly concealed locations are all exposed. The advantage is absolute. Iraqi anti-aircraft weapons are ineffective, unable to see or reach the aircraft controlling the fight. On the ground, Marine reconnaissance teams relay precise targeting data. They do not fire unless necessary. Their role is not to engage but to guide destruction. Within minutes of a report, precision fire arrives. Vehicles vanish in sudden flashes. Troop concentrations dissolve under accurate strikes that leave surrounding structures untouched. The message is unmistakable. Movement invites destruction, and staying still offers no safety. Simultaneously, Marine light armored vehicle units surge into action. Moving in small, coordinated groups, they exploit the narrow streets and blind angles of the city. Their speed allows them to appear, strike, and reposition before Iraqi crews can react. Tank guns struggle to track them. In confined spaces, heavy armor becomes a liability rather than protection. Several Iraqi crews abandon vehicles entirely, choosing exposure on foot over remaining inside steel coffins that draw lethal attention. Command cohesion collapses. Orders no longer flow reliably. Junior officers act independently, often contradicting neighboring units. Some attempt withdrawal without coordination. Others hold positions long after they are tactically irrelevant. The Iraqi force inside Khafji ceases to function as a division and instead fragments into disconnected pockets struggling for survival. By the early hours of January 31st, the outcome is no longer in doubt. The Iraqi advance has been stopped, reversed, and dismantled without the Americans committing their heavy armored formations. What remains is to understand how it happened and what it means for modern warfare. As dawn breaks on January 31st, 1991, the battlefield finally reveals its logic. Iraqi forces withdraw northward in disorder, abandoning vehicles that only days earlier were meant to spearhead a decisive ground offensive. For Iraqi commanders conducting post-battle assessments, the shock is not merely that they were defeated, but how they were defeated. Their armored formations were not destroyed by superior numbers or heavier tanks. They were dismantled by a force they had dismissed as incapable of decisive action. The core of that force was the U.S. Marine Corps Light Armored Vehicle Battalions. The LAV-25 was never designed to duel tanks head-on. Weighing roughly 13 tons and protected only against small arms and shell fragments, it should have been vulnerable in any traditional armored engagement. Yet paired with advanced night vision, thermal sights, disciplined crews, and a doctrine built around mobility, it became lethal. Its M242 Bushmaster 25mm chain gun could not penetrate the thick frontal armor of a T-55 or T-62, but it did not need to. By targeting optics, sensors, exposed fuel drums, and turret mechanisms, Marine crews achieved what armored theorists call mission kills. Tanks were blinded, immobilized, and psychologically broken without being physically destroyed. Alongside the chain gun, the presence of anti-tank variants armed with wire-guided missiles extended the Marines' reach far beyond Iraqi night fighting capability. Iraqi tanks, limited by outdated infrared systems, were often engaged and destroyed at ranges where they could neither see nor respond. This asymmetry was decisive. The battle was not fought tank against tank, but sensor against sensor, decision cycle against decision cycle. The broader lesson of Khafji was unmistakable. Heavy armor alone no longer guaranteed dominance. Information, speed, and decentralized command mattered more. Iraqi doctrine, shaped by Soviet emphasis on mass and rigid control, could not adapt once the plan collapsed. Marine units, by contrast, empowered junior leaders to observe, decide, and act faster than their opponents could react. For the Iraqi tankers who survived, the memory endured as something close to disbelief. They had entered the desert expecting a familiar battle, and instead found themselves hunted in the dark by enemies they could not see, hear, or predict. Khafji marked the moment when 20th-century armored assumptions collided with late Cold War reality, and lost. If you found this analysis valuable and want more deep dives into how modern warfare evolved under Cold War pressures, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and enabling notifications so you do not miss future briefings.